It all started earlier today. I had stayed after school to help a teacher move some boxes into his new classroom, as all my other classmates had brushed off lending him a hand. This ended up with me starting my journey home at around 3:34 in the afternoon. But I had earned an easy $20, so I wasn't complaining. I had just put my earbuds in to listen to music when my phone started to ring. The caller ID read that it was unknown, but the number looked somewhat familiar, but I just couldn't place it. And so, being curious, I picked up. "Hello, who is this?" I asked, my voice a bit shaky as I walked along the roadside, the sounds of cars passing by probably echoing into the microphone of my earbuds. There was no response, just the soft hiss of static before the call ended. I figured it was probably just some kid getting a hold of their parents' phone, or somebody calling the wrong number. Although it was odd that the number shared the same area code as mine. I lived in a small town after all. I closed my calling app and I went back to my music, pressing play and sliding my phone back into my pocket before starting off again on my journey home. I kid you not, it wasn't even 5 seconds before my phone started buzzing again. When it came, that familiar ringer interrupting my music yet again, and now playing loudly in my ears. I sighed and I pulled my phone from my pocket, and to my surprise, it was the same number. Once again, I dragged my finger across the screen, a green bar following my touch. "Okay, very funny. Who is this and where did you get my number?" I asked sternly, a bit irritated as I just wanted to listen to some music and get home. Again, silence for a good 20 seconds. This time, however, there was a response. I was just about to hang up after listening to the buzzing static when somebody coughed on the other end of the phone. The cough was wet and a bit forced, as if the person was in pain. "Please, Tristan, don't let me suffer." A strange gurgled voice came through the speaker. It was almost unrecognizable, but then it began to sound a little more familiar. It was a few moments before I realized that the voice sounded almost like my dad. "Dad? What's going on? Are you okay?" I asked, concerned, starting to grow anxious because it sounded like he was in severe pain, but he was supposed to be at work. I never got a response though. The void of where his voice had been replaced with the static once again, before the caller hung up promptly. I stood there staring at my phone, feeling a bit frightened as I tried to process what I had just heard. It wasn't over yet though, as I was greeted with yet another caller ID flashing on my phone screen. This time the caller was my best friend, Thomas. I quickly picked up and I put my phone to my ear in a swift motion, forgetting about the earbuds that I had in. "Hello, Thomas. I think my dad just called me from a different number and it sounded like he was dying." I was now growing a little more worried as the minutes passed, not completely sure if the voice I had heard was in fact my dad's or not. Whoa, calm down. Back up and start from the beginning." Thomas's clear, non-gurgly voice spoke into my ears, providing me with some sense of relief in the moment. I explained to Thomas what had happened in the past 10 minutes, about the unknown number with the voice and the static. He told me it was probably just some kid at our school trying to prank call me and recommended that I block the number, but I wasn't sure that's what it was. I didn't have many friends and so I didn't give out my phone number very often, but I was still left with the lingering question of who had called me and how they had acquired my number. But eventually, I forgot about the whole ordeal after talking to Thomas for a bit, once again starting to walk home. he ended up inviting me over to his house to stay the night. His parents were both out of town for work and he had the house to himself for the weekend, but he didn't want to spend the first night alone. We kept talking until I got home, discussing video games and girls, just the usual. As I started up my driveway, we planned the time of my arrival before saying our goodbyes as I reached the door, putting the key in the lock and turning it. To my misfortune, my key just snapped off in the lock, but what followed the key breaking almost gave me a heart attack. After my key broke in the lock, there was a wet, gurgly groan right behind the door, followed by the sound of unnaturally distant footsteps leading away from the door. I stood there, frozen, shivering as a chill ran down my spine. I didn't have any pets and my parents weren't home yet, and so I pulled out my phone and I ordered an Uber to take me straight to Thomas's as soon as I could move again. I swear, as my Uber pulled away from my house, I could see a shadow through the window of my room, standing right behind my door as if waiting for me to walk in. From the glance that I got of it, the shadow looked almost humanoid, but its torso was abnormally wide. All I can say is that I am incredibly happy I decided not to find a way inside. During the ride, I had called my mom and told her what had happened and what I had heard, texting a summary of what I had said to Thomas so I didn't have to explain things twice. My mom called the police and Thomas told me that he would wait for me outside until I arrived. Once I pulled around the corner onto a street, I could see him just as I said, standing at the edge of his driveway. I thanked the driver and I handed him the $20 I'd earned as a tip before exiting the car and greeting my best friend. We shook hands and hugged before he dragged me inside to discuss what had happened as he wanted more detail. He sat me down at the table and pulled out the chair across and sat down as well. "So, was there anything else that you didn't put in your text?" Thomas asked eagerly. He loved anything spooky or scary, so something like this was right up his alley. "Well, I'm not sure, but I don't think it was a person. The shadow looked like a human, yeah, but the chest, the whole torso actually was huge. Although the arms were still in proportional spots despite the enlarged chest." My voice was a bit shaky discussing this topic. I kept trying to think of details that I hadn't noticed right away, not really enjoying trying to remember it in such detail. Oh, and also, when it walked away from the door, it sounded like something was dragging behind it. It was squeaking on the hardwood floor like a wet towel. And Thomas sat there and listened intently, soaking up the details as they left my mouth. He sat back and he started to ponder. I don't think he quite understood that this had actually happened and that this wasn't some horror movie as I began to speak. "So it sounds like you have a case of mystery monster madness," he said proudly, enjoying his little diagnosis he had just come up with. "The symptoms are simple and easy. Being tailed by a monster, mysterious phone calls, and paranoia. Look, I'm not paranoid. I know what I saw. Well, what I heard." I stammered a bit, but inside I wanted to believe that what had happened was just my imagination. Boy, was I wrong. My phone started buzzing in my pocket and I jumped, the feeling of my phone ringing now correlating with fear of the unknown. I checked the caller ID and I saw that it was my mom. So I told Thomas to shut it for a second and I accepted the call. My mother sounded frantic, but also relieved to hear me answer before explaining what had just happened. As soon as she had said that the police had contacted her, I put the phone on speaker. "The police went and did a search of the house after I called them. I called your father, but I haven't been able to reach him." She trailed off, sounding like she was starting to choke up. the police found blood smeared all over the inside of the front door. They said it looked like somebody had cut open their own stomach and hugged the door before walking to your room. They said that your room was the worst. That blood had somehow been soaked into everything, like it had been there for quite some time. I sent you the pictures, but you don't have to look at them. I'm so happy you're safe. I love you so much. After that, she trailed on about having to file a police report and stating that staying the night at Thomas's was a good idea. She said that her and Dad were going to get a hotel room. She was just waiting for him to respond. I never told her about the phone calls that I had received earlier, not wanting to scare her any more than she already was. We talked for a few more minutes before we said our goodbyes and I hung up, pulling up the pictures as Thomas moved closer to see. Sure enough, the pictures showing an unsettling, gory mess of my home. The front door was as described, plastered with blood, but quite not covering all the white paint. It seemed to only be the worst around the middle of the door. The next photo, however, made me shudder. There was, again as described, a bloody trail around the leading away from the door towards my room. What my mom had failed to mention was that this trail was a mix of widespread bloody footprints and a thick line of blood running between them. I don't know what made the line, but I know that it's what made the dragging sound that I had heard. There were more pictures as the trail got closer to my room, but I turned my phone off before we could get to them. I didn't want the image of my room saturated with blood embroiled on my mind tonight. I had had enough at this point, and so Thomas and I made our way to his room, watching the afternoon and my mind away with video games. We had set up our laptops on foldable tables, sitting basically with our backs to each other with about 3 feet of distance between us. The afternoon soon turned to evening, and then to midnight. It had grown increasingly dark outside, and I hadn't really noticed until I decided to take a break and to stretch my legs. I took off my headset and I sat back, looking at the window and realizing that it was almost pitch black outside. You see, normally, this wouldn't bother as I lived in a wooded area. The dark is what I'm used to. Thomas, however, lives in a suburban area right next to all the shopping areas. There is no way that it could be this dark outside of his house. I called Thomas's name, but of course, his volume was up really high so he didn't turn around, or so much as turn his head. I was about to call his name again when something caught my attention. I could see the whole room in the reflection of his window, but something seemed off. One of his posters wasn't backwards. That may sound weird, but you know how when you look at writing in the mirror, the writing is backwards? Well, I could read this poster clearly from left to right. Seeing this, I started scanning the room a bit more for anomalies, but everything else looked normal. I then glanced down at my reflection, and I was greeted by my face, normal as usual and still following my movement. So then, knowing that I had my reflection, I looked over at Thomas's. I let out a gasp as I looked at the empty space in his reflection. The chair he was currently sitting in was empty in the window, the headset still resting on his laptop as if waiting to be used. And then there was a soft tapping on the window, and I snapped my gaze to the spot of the sound, my stomach sinking as it did. I saw my reflection's face pressed tightly against the window. A large unnatural grin spread across the gleaming and sinking holes where my eyes would be. I blinked and my reflection was gone, completely gone. But Thomas's had returned, so I quickly turned around in my chair to tell him what I saw. His reflection had returned, but he was gone. Not only this, but his headphones were now resting on his powered-off laptop. I've never felt so many chills run down my back as I had when I slowly veered my gaze over to the wall. There was only a single poster, and the writing was backwards. My mouth gaped in horror, but no sound had left my lips. There wasn't enough time to. The silence was broken by a loud, wet, gurgly groan from down the hall, again followed by the squelch and slap of unnatural footsteps in something wet sliding in tow. The footsteps grew closer to the door, and then continued past, growing quiet as whatever it was had gone downstairs. It's been about 15 minutes now, I think. I shouldn't stay here. Whatever that thing is might come back, but I'm too scared to move right now. Thomas finally noticed that I was gone, and he searched his room and probably house for me several times. He can't see me in his window, and I know this because he has looked right through me multiple times. And since I can't get his attention, and there doesn't seem like a way back in here, I think it's about time that I go see what's been making that noise. I clenched my fist tightly and mustered the willpower to rise to my feet, moving slowly towards the door. I cracked it open and I peeked out into the hall beyond. It was pitch black, and the smell, God, the smell, gently wafted into the room and into my nose. I recoiled in disgust, almost vomiting, as the aroma seemed to be a mix of blood and rotting eggs. I closed the door and I backed up again, looking around for something I could use to cover my nose. Luckily, all of the clothes on Thomas's floor were still there, and they at least smelled fresh in comparison to that godforsaken hallway. I wrapped 2 shirts around my lower face, trying to create enough of a barrier so that the smell wasn't right to my nose, but still allowing me to breathe. After I finished my mask, I looked back at the window. The reflection of the room was gone and replaced by the pitch black outside of the window, and I'm pretty sure the light in this room started getting dimmer by the second. So I walked over to the door and I opened it, and once again, being met with the dark hallway and that horrid stench. I pulled out my phone and I switched on my flashlight, although the darkness seemed to absorb a large amount of it. I pointed the flashlight to the carpet and I felt my heart rate rise. The beam lit the red, widespread footsteps that dotted the carpet edges, with a large red line flowing straight down the center. And despite the cold blood coursing through my veins at this point, I forced myself to step into the hallway, and as I did, the door shut behind me. I tried to open it, but it was as if it was never meant to be opened from the side. I heard footsteps and sliding again, the sound moving around a bit but staying downstairs before it stopped, the silence returning. I pointed my flashlight to head towards the floor, starting to follow the trail. If whatever this thing was could navigate these halls in this darkness, it would be able to see me with or without the flashlight. Even so, I was a bit cautious as I inched forward toward the stairs. I think I walked by about 7 more doors, but not a single one of them opened, so I kept walking. The stairs eventually came into view, meaning my walk down this elongated hallway was now finally coming to an end. As I reached the first step, I noticed that I could somewhat see the first floor from the top of the stairs. This was a huge relief, since an extended staircase would be a dead end if there were more of these things roaming the house. I looked behind me one more time, scanning the hall and listening for any approaching sounds. Silence has never sounded so sweet. But then another gurgled groan traveled the air from downstairs, shattering my sweet silence. My face was hot with fear now, despite my blood freezing in my veins, my heartbeat sounding like a horse's hooves on a racetrack. I put one foot out and I stepped down onto the second step of the staircase. I put on another and another, repeating this process until I was halfway down the stairs. I leaned over the banister and I had shown my flashlight around, but to my dismay, I couldn't see any walls. It was wide open and had pieces of furniture arranged variously across the floor. It was almost like being in a furniture store, the way everything was neatly placed around. But I noticed that everything seemed to only be furniture that was in Thomas's house. I pointed my flashlight back at the stairs and I finished the trek down, glancing at which way the bloody trail led. It seemed to go straight out for several feet before making an abrupt right turn. Although I knew I shouldn't, I chose to follow the trail, wanting to know what had been in my house and now in my friend's as well. I guess this isn't his house anymore though. Once again, searching myself far and wide, I finally mustered enough courage together to begin walking again, placing my feet lightly to hopefully avoid alerting this thing in here with me. I continued to follow the trail, the stench of blood and rotting eggs getting stronger and fouler the more that I walk. I think I'm getting close to it. Placing a foot in front of the other, I moved forward through the darkness and finally, I saw it. I froze where I stood in response to what I saw before my eyes. It was about 5'9", standing completely still and silent with its back to me. It looked human, but the reason the torso looked so big was because, from what I could see, the front of the chest down to the waist looked to be cut open and spread apart. And the red line between the footsteps, it was just the thing's large intestine hanging out, just barely touching the floor. I just stared at the creature standing there, barely in my field of vision, the flashlight pointed right at it now. It was unnaturally still and quiet, especially with all the sound it had made earlier. And the vibrating began, followed by broken sounds as my ringers sang out into the darkness, no echo due to the lack of walls. It was the unknown number, the same one that I had blocked. I panicked from the suddenness of the call, but to my surprise, the thing didn't react. It just continued to stand there, staring at my phone. But after a couple of seconds, I slowly raised my phone to my ear. The familiar sound of static buzzed through the speaker before two voices spoke a familiar phrase into my ear. The creature groaned to life and with one loud, wet, blood-filled, gurgly moan, it spoke the phrase into the silence. And for the first time all night, I heard an echo as my phone crackled with its voice.
Please, Tristan, don't let me suffer.
The thing spoke, and with that, it turned around to show me itself in all its horrific, twisted nature. Its torso was split open down the center, but not from being cut. The ribcage had grown all the way down the spine and it extended until its skin could no longer hold its shape, thus bursting open and letting all the contents spill out. And that wasn't the worst part though. The worst part was that I already knew. It had been chewing at the back of my mind for quite some time now, but I had never consciously thought about it. Looking up at its head and its face, it was my dad's unmistakably. But he had the same sunken holes and unnatural smile that my reflection had. And when it spoke again, blood seemed to trickle from the holes like tears.
Please, Tristan, suffer for me instead.
It gurgled, holding out its hands a bit as if to welcome me for a big hug.
When you suffer, I can finally sleep.
Its last word sank, turning back into a deep, gurgling moan as its eyes rolled back and it lurched towards me. With a quick motion and a feat of great strength, it broke off the end of one of its ribs and I realized that it now had a weapon, as if it needed one. I quickly turned in the opposite direction and I ran as fast as I could, desperate to get away at this point. Despite its stature, however, the thing kept up with me. I could hear its feet slapping the floor as it chased me through this endless darkness, its intestines dragging and blood spewing out like a fountain. After a while though, it seemed to lose energy and slow down, and upon seeing this, I pushed myself to run faster. The more distance I can put between me and this thing, the better. Eventually, after running, I stopped to catch my breath. I don't know how long I had been running or how far, but I can hear it wailing in the distance now, and it's definitely following me. There's no exit and there's no chance of finding the stairs again either. I'm stuck in here with it and I can't keep running forever. I still seem to be able to use a small parts of the internet, so that's how I'm writing this now. I don't know what this thing is or where it came from, or if I will survive this. My phone is going to die soon, and when that happens, I will be embraced by darkness. There are two things that I know for sure. First, everything seems to be tied to the unknown number. And secondly, I finally realized why the unknown number looked familiar. The area code was normal, but what I hadn't noticed was that it was my dad's number, just backwards. So please, if you ever get a call from an unknown number in your area, don't answer it. I did, and now I fear that the next time I talk over the phone, I won't be on the receiving end.